know that there was another granite column beneath the mid-cap. There's a flipped end cap and then 3 steps up to that. After the last grade raising, the original bronze doors were actually cut so that you could still have access to it. So even though it's a lot taller than me, it would have been very tall and thin and impressive back in the day.
So this is composed of primarily marble, but we do have these granite columns here that are incorporated into it, which is quite interesting, polished granite. And this style, we actually have another right over by where we started from. There's a monument, it's all marble with this granite also, and I have seen these in almost every state in the entire country. This is almost definitely from St. Cloud, Minnesota. I'm pretty sure, unless you have other sourcing on this.
It could be out of Granite or Marble Falls, Texas.
It's out of Marble Falls.
It will be the killer or
Reston.
Okay, maybe so, but I've seen these.
His name
in
is
every
Reston
state,
52.
and to me, it looks like, but anyway, I'm not sure of the origin, but this particular style incorporating granite, I've seen this in Illinois, I've seen this in New England, and it was an interesting style, but combining the elements of the polished granite along with marble, showing the marble was available, but they were working with multiple materials. You also see where we started, we see some two-tone, and I don't know if there's any 3 colors of granite on one monument, all looking original, almost like an Art Deco look, and that's a little later. Here is primarily marble. Now if we come in here, actually we still see a bit of polish in the most protected area, usually under a cap like this, and if you want to feel it, you come in here, run your finger across this, and it's smooth to touch, and you have to realize that these monuments, these mausoleums in this case, you know, these were generally polished, and so that polish has worn away over time, but it's a beautiful monument. That's why I want this with some kind of bronze, probably oxidized or pattern. And a lot of mold on this as well, obviously. And what style is this built? Is this like almost a Gothic revival or something? A Gothic revival?
Gabriel, who calls you to heaven. We're really lucky that he is still so intact. This is a Pompeo Campini original. He was the sculptor who designed the Magruder's cenotaph for a monument. Even the shaft of his trumpet is still complete. And if you see him in different times of the day with the shadowing, his expression actually seems to change because he's so realistic. You can even still see the feathering on the back of his wings. This is a Hutchinson glass forehead. Good Irish Catholic, and he didn't want there to be any mistakes, so he slapped a Celtic cross on top of it.
What year was this installed? You know?
That would have been
White weather.
1922.
Oh, late. Okay.
And the lettering on the
1922 is quite late for marble. Marble was losing market share. It was not a popular material anymore across America. It may have been more popular in some regions like around here, but granite had taken over, and a lot of the bigger cemeteries, the planned cemeteries, had already started to disallow marble installations unless they were matching to other existing markers on the plot. I'll also mention, it just caught my eye, we're not going to walk back, that large, beautiful obelisk there is a great example of the most coveted granite in America, which is Westerly, and it's like pristine condition. That's from Westerly, Rhode Island, and it was the finest grade granite and the most desirable of this quarry till there was none left. And you can see the whole plot enclosure is also made, including the urns, of the same material, and so that would have been, you know, transported on railroad or, well, probably on ship from there. Westerly's on the water, so that installation from?
I believe that was erected when he passed away.
Right, so that's interesting because that's older than this historically, and that's granite, and it shows you the granite was already, superseding the marble. Marble was becoming less and less desirable, and by World War II, it really fell out of popularity, but it's a regional thing because in areas with less rainfall, and when you get out west further, you'll still see new marble installations, so it's regional, but it became less common.
And he mentioned having family plot fences. Most of these family plots still do have their wrought iron fences around them, including the Hutchins plot. They've just been buried over time. If you come look around on this side of the monument, you're going to see what looks like a little ball on the ground. That's the only finial left on a 5.5 foot tall fence that's still in pristine condition. A friend and I, a couple of years ago, excavated the entire fence, which goes around the entire large plot. The gate is on this side. It still swings on the hinges. But of course, we also refilled it immediately the same day that we dug it up because we didn't want to make the ground unstable. Being mostly sand, we didn't want anything to shift. So we documented it and filled it back in. But what we're not seeing are the family plot fences that are all underground now.
Crazy. Complicated site.
Very.
And what do you think about this right here? Do you think this was underground? Why is this so clean up to a line, only low down?
That's probably a good guess.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think this was replacement.
Water coming in
Could-
and flooding the site every so often.
Could be.
Could be. The
I'm not
water
seeing that
after a
on every-
hurricane stands to about this height and will stay for 3 or 4 days. So you'll see a debris line. But because that's so distinct, it was probably raised and put on a replacement pedestal, like Rusty said.
Yeah, obviously that base is not that old, but
Yeah, it's probably
considering what
20s.
was originally
Yeah.
there.
So here's a great example of a white bronze marker.
Oh, I want one for
White
me.
Bronze became popular in the late 1800s, and it weighs a fraction of what stone weighs, and that's why I can lift this up, okay? And this is, hopefully people aren't aware of this because this should be fastened down. It's quite interesting. I rarely see this, a hole like this. It's like
Look
a
at
brick.
the snail.
It's like a brick vault, almost like, but it's very narrow. It's very unusual. But I always like kind of take a look at these and see if they're loose. If I turn this sideways, you can see the internal construction. And the company was the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut. You'll see these all over America. There was regional affiliates, and they're just really interesting. They were less expensive. They were popularized in the late 1800s, and they existed till about World War I when the factory was taken over to make munitions for the war effort. They were competing with both marble and the granite industries, and they were not popular with either of them. But they were less expensive and much lighter, and you'll see them all over America, so they're really interesting.
They're also strong and they always read just like they were just installed. So if they're
Right.
right next to a really expensive marble marker, sometimes you can't even read that marble marker anymore.
Right.
But we can read Edmund's name like this.
And they were actually banned from some of the bigger garden cemeteries because they said they wouldn't last, and they weren't real stone, and they were a cheap alternative to real stone. And so some of the bigger garden cemeteries had a lot of regulations, and they disallowed these. Now, where was the one we saw that was really in Holly Springs, Mississippi, just about a week ago? We saw a really large, beautifully made white bronze obelisk, one of the largest installations on the site, or the larger, and it was badly collapsing from the accumulative weight, because one of the issues with these, which is not an issue at all on a there's not enough internal support, and so they can collapse and kind of deform and disfigure slowly over time. But anyway, it's a beautiful example of a white bronze, and these were primarily made of zinc.
I was about to say, is that the same as zinc or a different name for zinc?
I mean, so what the company was called the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and these were marketed as white bronze because in all the revival movements, bronze was coveted and desirable. So they marketed as white bronze. These have a very different appearance when they're first made. And if you ever want to see them, well, we'll be posting pictures of them. But once we get into more arid areas like Nevada and Colorado, you'll see how these originally looked because they're not weathered there. They're not this blue color. They're not oxidized in the same way.
That is interesting. You think this look is so pristine, and it is until you see what they look like out west.
Yeah, no, they're totally
And
different.
then it's like,
The advantage
That's
we
what
have
they're supposed to look
down
like.
this far south though is up north when the base is flush and they're fastened down. If there's a leak in the seam and it fills with water and freezes, it might crack.
We don't see
We don't
that
see
really.
that.
We don't.
And
I've seen it in Oklahoma, but I've never seen it here
you
because
don't
we don't
have,
get that much ice.
I've not seen that
We don't
issue
have that
with
problem
white
in
bronze.
New England. And generally speaking, these are not put on brick. And the nicer installations
Yeah.
are put on natural stone bases that are raised bases that are elevated with a drop wash. And so if it's in Connecticut, it might be a sandstone. If it's in Indiana, it might be a limestone. And they usually hold up really well. I mean, they rarely have issues.
The bigger ones that struggle because they're so big with no internal support whatsoever, it just starts to collapse on itself. It's like the
Right.
metal starts to.
So they don't have enough internal framework, skeleton, and that's a unique thing for the larger installations. But yeah, the
So
small
what
ones.
would you suggest to adhere this to a brick base?
I mean, we
Because
could
it's
do
metal
some.
and brick.
Yeah, that's not an issue. So they used to have little connectors, and you could probably see the remnants of them right here that would fasten
Right.
them. The best way, if we have a flat surface like this, is we could, right where these connectors are, we could just do a couple spots of like a viscous epoxy or epoxy putty
Now this one's also
and
one
fasten
piece
it down.
too. Yeah. This is also one piece, not panel.
Right, and the larger ones were made with replaceable panels, and that was part of why they were popularized, because then you could change the inscription out when someone else passed away
Yeah.
on multiple
And we can
sides.
go look at one of those right now. Just
Awesome.
as a
Let's
visual.
continue. Any questions about different theories? And we have some, slightly different ideologies, maybe on certain subjects, and but mostly it's similar. And but anyway, we're going to be using the same product, which is the D2 biological solution, which has become the top cleaner for historic gravestones because it's safe to use on any kind of stone. It's based on quaternary ammoniums, which aren't ammonia. They're vaguely related in chemistry, but they're not ammonia. So it's not an acid. It's not. We're not cleaning with pH. pH scale is 0 to 14, neutral 7, and acid is on the low side, alkalines on the high side. And there's a lot of cleaning products that are cleaning more based on that, like acids. And most like restoration cleaners that they clean buildings with are highly acidic. D2 is not acidic at all. It's cleaning with quaternary ammoniums. And so we poured the D2 into this container right here, and that's the red ribbon on it, shows that this is D2, because we also have some of these similar containers that are just for water and rinsing. And so Rusty sprayed it on this one right here ahead of time, and we got this orange color change. You want to talk about that, why that happens?
So I've got lots of calls late at night, people thinking they ruined a headstone. So it is not the cleaner that's causing that color. It is, well, the cleaner causes the algae and stuff to turn those colors. But it's a defense mechanism of the plant growth that's on the stone. But not all of them turn these colors. It has to have a particular bacteria on it to have that red effect. I've also seen purples, orange, red. There's lots of variations of those colors. The reason I wanted this one sprayed, one, is that so you get to see that kind of whoa. So if you walk up, you spray the headstone, freaking out, it just means it's working, basically.
Changing as quick as I spray it.
Right.
So here it's application immediately changing. We're usually, from my experience, we've traveled the whole country, when there's biological growth, algae, lichen, moss, fungus, mold, we're usually going to get a color change in warmer weather. Not 100% of the time, but we'll usually get it in warmer weather. If we're below 50, not so much. But we're usually seeing some color change, and it varies how dramatic and how quick it's occurring. Now, there's different ways you can use this product, and personally, the way I use it most of the time is not like the way we do it in workshops. I do application only. I spray it on and walk away. And that is actually the most friendly way to the stone, because as soon as you take a brush, even a soft bristle brush like this, which is Tempico, it's very friendly to the stone. It's still mechanical, and you're still touching the stone. And a lot of places, oh, we're going to clean all the veteran stones every year, and they brush the heck out of them. Probably not necessary. And I'll just speak from personal experience, as I mentioned yesterday. and it's not always equal. It's not one size fits all, but certain cemeteries where I've cleaned 1,000 stones personally, treated them. I really didn't clean them. And so you could use different words, but the application of the product only, and then what'll happen is it'll dry and it'll become inactive until it gets wet again. It's going to wax and wane. And so what's going to happen is it'll come dormant temporarily when it dries because the cells won't communicate and contact each other. Then it gets wet, it reactivates it. And so it's going to keep cleaning for an extended amount of time every time it gets rained on, right? For how long?
So it's gone.
Well, not one application does not always remove all the staining. And so if we have especially, say, for example, on the extreme level where it's really hard to remove is a sandstone that's more porous and it's got a thick layer of lichen on it, and one application, from my experience, usually won't do it on that. Even if you do a pre-scraping and do other things ahead of time, one application in some situations isn't enough. And so
it can take a very long time. Like
that's right.
I've done some testing stuff where we sprayed entire granite headstones that looked like a carpet. There was so much lichen on them.
Right.
And it took 9 months, and then it just started falling off. And yes, the staining underneath that then takes another application to clean it. So the other thing would be some of the black bacterias that are inside the stone here, like on this one, they're going to take a lot longer for it to get rid of. You're going to see a lightening and a grading of that over time, but then again, it may take a second application further down the line. The key of all that is be patient, I would say. Back to what Jonathan said about scrubbing, right? So if we want to truly be as gentle as possible on the headstone, the easiest application method is just to spray it and leave it and let it work. Now, that doesn't work for a lot of people. So if you're going to go the method of scrubbing, there have been lots of videos and stuff done out there. One of the earliest was Jason Church with the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, where they tell you to wet the stone first.
Back up a little. When D2 was first invented, I've been in this field longer than that, we were using other cleaners. And so back in the 90s, and I was working with Association for Gravestone Studies, and we were using calcium hypochlorite, which is basically chlorine in a very high dilution on marble. It has never been proven to be harmful, in my opinion, actually. However, D2 is safer and more effective, and also calcium hypochlorite was only safe on marble, not on other materials. And so anyway, the whole field has evolved a lot in the past 20 plus years, and D2 is unique because it's safe on all stone, it's even safe on wood or vinyl, and so you don't have to worry about harming a stone. A lot of people are worried about identifying the stone before they clean it. It is nice to do that, but it is not necessary because it's not going to be harmful. But also, just one other thing, that it's also used on modern monuments. You're coming at this from a modern monument side with your family business,
Where
right?
I started, yeah.
And so that if you're cleaning, it could be especially an unpolished modern monument like the ones we're looking at right over here are modern monuments, and they're gray granite, and especially on an unpolished, you'll get a lot of staining on those, and you can be much more aggressive on those and use a stiffer scrub brush. We don't want to use metal bristles, but you could use a much stiffer brush and be more aggressive on granite because it's a much harder material, right? I mean,
Absolutely. So in that scrubbing vein of what he's just talking about, so my pick is usually a Tampico grass. I like the wooden handles better than the plastic. You agree?
yeah, and that's what we're using here. And also these brushes, and I think you have some of the same. These are actually made in Texas by Magnolia Brush, and probably the last significant brush, one of the last significant American brush manufacturers. Most brushes are imported, from China and overseas, and most brushes today sold by box stores and hardware stores are usually synthetic, with the exception of what they call an acid brush, which tends to be a rectangular square brush. But Tampico is a natural fiber. It gets softer when it gets wet, and so we can just come in here, and this is the way I would normally clean, with the water in one hand and just lightly brushing if we're going to do the brush and rinse. Okay, and that's, I don't know if you have some different techniques, but just lightly brushing. You can see how a lot of staining is coming off, but we want to be real minimalistic and friendly to the stone.
Especially when you're talking about something that's already got some deterioration, and one of those things that we see is what we call sugaring, right? So if you were to run your hand on the stone and you look and you have little pieces of the stone coming off, then the spray and walk away method is the perfect thing to do on that.
Now also, if there's raised lichen, we can use plastic scrapers that could speed up the process. We don't always use them, we don't always need them, but it's good to have them in our cleaning kit. And so we want a flexible, soft plastic that wears away easily and protects the stone. If we're going to scrape something, and so on this side of this, there's almost something to scrape. There's really not enough raised lichen. This stone right here looks like it would have enough to scrape on it, and so we could give that a try. The first thing, we're going to come in and make sure the stone is stable. In other words, we're not going to knock it over just by touching it with a brush. And this is, you know, a little unstable, but a light brushing isn't going to knock it over.
You know, and if you're worried about it, you're comfortable, keep a hand on it, be stable. If it's leaning a lot, you've got it, it's loose, and it can be knocked over easily. You think about the safety of yourself, but also the headstone. We don't want to knock it over and break it, right?
The next thing, exactly, and the next thing is, so like Rusty said, sugaring is an issue, and sugaring is the technical term for that is more granular disintegration, and the marble has lost its structural integrity, and it's starting to just like kind of roll off like little granules of sugar. It's also actually calcium carbonate, but if you just run your finger across a stone that's really badly sugaring, you'll feel little granules on your hand, and you can see the appearance. It's highly eroded. It becomes harder to read the inscription. Now we encounter different kinds of stone, not just marble. Generally marble will sugar, maybe occasionally limestone, but generally marble. And the other issues that we want to be careful of are delaminating stones. That's when they're splitting apart, especially on a sandstone or limestone, and sometimes cracks open and they start to separate, and they can be really weak. And so we don't want to push hard on a brush with those either. And then also a term called spalling, which is the loss of little like flecks of stone that's more isolated or random, but once again, we're trying to preserve it and not diminish the historic integrity of it. And so we want to be aware of that. One other thing, we should always photograph what we're going to do to document it, and so everyone has cameras and phones, and so we want to take some photos before we start that will show the condition before we begin, and then we can take photos after, especially with the best lighting, and then that will, you know, document the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the worst about taking a picture when I'm doing the work. So usually I'm assessing and taking those before we get there so that I have that information ahead of time, because once I get busy doing stuff, I forget about all that. Picking a brush. My theory is this. If you'll scrub your skin with it, you can use it on something historic this soft. But we're not trying to get it down to the nub and, you know, really crank on it. You know, we don't want to use wire. We don't want to use really, really hard nylon and stuff on something this soft. Now, on a granite, you can get away with using nylon. I still prefer the natural Tampico.
Now this is a nylon bristle polyester that is friendly, and it's just a little stiffer than the Tampico, and it also depends how hard we push and how much water we use. And but we want to definitely avoid on the historic stones, and to differentiate between that and the modern granites, we definitely want to avoid using a really aggressive brush. We had some folks show up with their own brushes in Tuscaloosa, and they were like really, really stiff, you know, and like they'll clean the stone, don't get me wrong, but you're going to take stone off with the cleaning process. And so actually we could jump past that and say wire brushes will do the same thing. They'll have a great cleaning effect, but you're actually going to remove a little stone. And so then also high pressure washers, same thing. It's going to clean quickly, it'll look really great, except it's diminishing the stone, it's rounding out the edges, and then also sandblasting. And a lot of monument companies are still, some are still doing that, although, you know, there's less and less, there's more kind of, you know, information out there to discourage that, but using a very fine abrasive, like historically a silicate, and just dusting it, and it'll make it look perfectly clean, and it'll look really nice, and to an untrained, you know, eye, or the average person, it's amazing. And because it's going to transform it instantly. They're going to show up with the equipment, and in a matter of 20 minutes, it's going to look new, right? But you're removing stone, and you're rounding all the edges, and if you do it once, it's not good, but if you do it on a regular basis, you're going to just destroy the whole stone. So,
yeah, the same thing with that is not just the pressure washing, right? It's happened many times over the years, but people come in and, like John talked about, the acids that we used to use. So I've been to lots of cemeteries where they were cleaning the marble with the acid, and it just melts away the exterior of the stones. You get that same rounding effect. You get loss of letter, loss of detail on the carving. which is not our purpose. We're trying to conserve, not remove stone.
So yeah, so anyway, the idea is we can clean a few stones here and go in a little deeper. But what we're cleaning here, to be clear, is algae, lichen, moss, fungus, mold. Mostly lichen is on the surface and the molds tend to get under the surface. It's going to be variable. And come over on this side. This is the nastiest stuff going. If you come to this side, there's a kind of lichen that looks like a spotty tar. It looks like someone splattered tar on it. And that stuff just doesn't come off easily.
Scrapes like tar.
Talk about it.
And I'm not sure which one it is, right? But it's like you spray the detail on it. It's obviously we've got all this color change.
Great example
but,
right here.
But this stuff here, if you rub it, it's slick. And we can scrub, we can work on it.
Let's put some water on here and go ahead and try to brush it and see what comes off. Now all I'm using is water. Another thing, I see a lot of people, we spray the D2 on one application. Don't keep spraying it on while you're cleaning it. One application is enough for this first cleaning. Okay, if we're going to do a second application, first we want to rinse, let it mostly dry, and then we could do a second application. But we don't want to just keep spraying it on because it's a waste of product, and it's probably not going to do any more cleaning right, in the real time. And so we can also use bigger sprayers here like these. And these are kind of the next best things to sliced bread. And so this big sprayer here has a lithium-ion battery power head, so it has the pump and the battery in it. So with this, we're going to get more pressure. We don't have to pump. And so these are an option. But you can see how it took a little bit off, but it doesn't look good. And so this is going to take a lot of time for that to clean, right?
Down here, probably a little faster than some places, but yes, it will take time. And sometimes we're 3 weeks, sometimes we're 3 months, sometimes it's a year.
Yeah, but what do you think one application will ever remove that?
I have seen it do it. This is pretty minimal compared to some.
Okay, interesting.
But there, sometimes when you can scrub it, it's like you're pulling tar out of the stuff.
Exactly. And honestly, from what I see here, clearly, cleaning is not your issue. Okay, cleaning is a minor issue. There's much bigger issues ever, and here, not so much from what I'm seeing. Because the stone is more eroded, and growth is more ingrained into it, and we're just not seeing it remove that. Any questions or comments?
John, when you said you suggested to take pictures before, during, and after, because it's such a long process, a lot of people tend to want immediate gratification for it to be all bright. Wouldn't you suggest to maybe come back in 3 months, take another picture,
Absolutely.
6 months, take another picture, and you'll actually see a gradual.
Yeah, I mean, if you.
Even though you're not cleaning it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an option. And I said the main thing is to document your work. And I mean, this is a wider ranging comment, not limited to cleaning. And so the one thing you can never recreate is the photo before you start something. And so that you should always take a lot of photos before you start. And so even that'll show you the direction of the stone. Sometimes they're multi-sided, you might forget. That will show you the lay of the land, what was adjacent to it. And so just document what you do. You can always fill out assessment forms later if you want to, if there's time, or if there's if it's necessary. But you can never go back and recreate the picture. As soon as you spray it on, it's going to change it. So but as far as, yes, you could monitor it and you can document it that way if you have the time, and you could pick a spot that you photographed it from and come back and re-photograph it. I mean, you can do whatever you want. I mean, that's certainly an option.
Along the photographic thing, all y'all probably been to Find a Grave, right? And all the headstones are like right up on the headstone. That's great. But get some surrounding pictures.
I say,
you have other stuff.
Well put. I always recommend at least 2 photos. One is going to be a close-up with the best angle from the lighting. One is going to be an overview that shows something significant on the site that is unique. And so, like, say from here, if you have an overview, and behind here it has you'll see the back, that big monument with the statue on top and the mausoleum. And so just, anyway, or the tile here even. And so then come back and say, where is that feature? And so, because, if you don't have a plot number and you don't have all this documentation, it can be very hard to find. And so something taller, that is a unique monument that's taller, and then you can kind of figure out the angle it was taken. And if you only had those 2 photos, because if you only have a close-up, like Rusty said, you'll never find it. It's like in a sea of stone. But that other photo, that might not be a close-up, that shows the exact description, could be the one that brings you back to it if all you have is those 2 photos.
Just don't use trees or landscaping as your line of sight things, because those change over time. We used to have a canopy of
the idea is for folks to get their hands dirty now and get involved, and this is the easiest thing. And so if you want to jump in and clean some stones, we have plenty of brushes, we have plenty of D2, we have more products as well if needed. And I'll just also mention, yeah, the smaller brushes would be used lightly. These are a little more aggressive. They're nylon, but they're not metal. And, you know, along with the water, you know, we could get into these like recesses like this, okay? The bigger brush will just skate over this, and so we could use these to come in those little areas.
And once that wears down, it gets more stiff. So once it wears down a little bit, get a new brush.
Yeah, these are pretty inexpensive, and again, these are made to wear away. And the key thing also, whenever you're doing cleaning of sensitive materials, you're not scrubbing really hard, and you're using lots of water. So it's lighter, and so like I'm holding this lightly, like it's floating in my hand. I'm not like pushing really hard, because at the end of events, we sometimes get these back, and there's like no bristles on them. Like it's worn to the plastic everywhere but one side, and so it's probably much more overly aggressive brushing than would be advised.
Do you have any popsicle sticks or chopsticks?
We have
got stuff here.
Yeah, we have scrapers,
So in
small
events
brushes.
that I've done, when we get back to wash the buckets out, people have been rinsing their brush in it to keep their brushes wet, keep the stones wet. You always know who was scrubbing too hard because there's always little particles of stone at the bottom.
Right, and we could do that's a good point. We could do a dip method, and if we have a bucket, but as soon as you dip it in, the whole bucket's dirty, and that's okay. I like to just keep water flowing, like while I'm
And
cleaning.
I use these to wash my brush and just have a little water I can dump on it.
Just think of this: if you are doing the brush method on a storage stone, the more water, the better, and just keep irrigating it and lightly brush and rinse it as you go. Right?
I have a whole water truck to refill on, so
So without anything further said, I mean, I sprayed it on that stone right behind, and Rusty did this. You could come in lightly brushing. Be real careful around these carved elements, but you could really lightly go on this. Again, I don't even like to brush stones in this condition. They're variable though. Some are in better condition than others. This seems like actually a little better, this marble, but every stone is a little different. But we can come in and lightly brush these, it'll be fine. So if anyone wants to jump in, don't be shy. If you haven't done, who hasn't done this before? Well, a lot of folks. So you should try it out, and Rusty's here so he can help guide you as well as myself. So someone's got to jump in and get dirty.
If I'm doing a project